what we're really looking for is like who's primed to make that like box office hit like once they're hired. And you don't know, you have to take some risks, but if you can on the talent acquisition side know how to identify that potential and pair that with talent development who can increase the probability of that person following through to deliver something really special, that's the make or break of a company.
Hello and welcome to the Making Better podcast, where we talk about how to make ourselves, our teams, and our organizations better. Whether you are a business leader, a talent development professional, or an individual contributor, this show will give you actionable insights to help improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Today, our guests are Seyka and Brian Mejeur. This is the first time we've had two people on the podcast, so I'm really excited for the conversation. This husband and wife team are co-founders of Ad Astra, a company devoted to helping space and clean energy startups find the key talent that they need for their early hires. Brian was an engineer at SpaceX, and after his time there, he teamed up with Seyka, who was in the talent acquisition industry, to help find highly technical talent who was passionate about the same things that they are. I'm really excited for this particular discussion because I think that talent development and talent acquisition often don't talk as much as we should. So in this episode, we talk about what talent development can do to help widen the talent pool for specific roles, the importance of culture clarity, how you can put a clear dollar amount on the impact of your training, and so much more. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to remind everybody that if this is your first time listening, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. And if you are already subscribed, then I humbly ask that you would share this show with at least one other person, because that is how we grow, and I cannot tell you how much it means to me. With that, let's get into the discussion with Seyka and Brian Mejeur. So Seyka, I want you to be honest with me. When you were in companies doing all your time in talent acquisition, how much time do you think you've really spent working with talent development teams?
Very little. Almost none.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was expecting. That's definitely been my experience. And then, so to get a little bit different perspective to Brian, we both worked at SpaceX. When you've been in the businesses and teams, and you're thinking about bringing people onto teams, in that whole like buy it versus build it equation, how much of kind of the thought energy do you think goes into hiring compared to talent development on most teams?
It's a good question. I think it kind of has to be broken down into are we thinking about hiring more junior talent that eventually steps into leadership roles, or are we saying, "Oh, we have this person and we want to get them to this place, and how do we do that?" I think a lot of companies are good at the first part, like, "Oh, let's hire a bunch of interns." It's
Yeah.
like free interviewing, free validation of talent, or like we'll hire a lot of early career folks, and then like the cream of the crop will rise and take on more things. And there is a strong bias to do that in a lot of organizations, which I think can be really healthy. But I also don't know if there's that much infrastructure or support in directing someone into that role. You can end up with technical leaders, but without really any guidance on how to do a lot of the more management duties, for example.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right. And yeah, that's been my experience as well. Before we were talking on the call, I was sharing with you that I find it so strange that, both roles, talent development, talent acquisitions, they both say talent, but for some reason, like we never really talk very much. I've been in maybe, I don't know, I think I've seen maybe half a dozen at most companies where they have a big picture talent leader who is truly in charge of it all. But I don't know, if you go on to LinkedIn and looked up talent leader, typically they're talking about recruiting, like they're talking about the recruiting leader when they say that. Seyka, you and I have had a lot of conversations in the past, or we had a conversation about this in the past. Like, I don't know, how does that affect the talent acquisition side of things?
Yeah, there are so many different directions that we can go with this, but yeah, a key one is especially when we're talking about recruitment. So right, what we do is very, very niche, very focused, startups, clean tech and space startups, right? Talent pool, not big. The people that we're able
Yeah.
to pull in from other industries, it's tough to do once people have developed their career either at legacy companies. It's really tough to get them into into successfully integrated into a startup, or if they're coming from tech, it can be hard to get them right. We need high reliability people. There's just a lot of nuance there. We want to get our talent pool bigger. What will happen at startups is, you need somebody who can do the thing, who can own the thing, and the number of people who in the world, the number of people who can do that work, really small. Like sometimes we're talking in, less than 10 people in the world that can do this job. And you can sometimes find, you contact all 10 of the people who can do the work right now, and none of them want to move to LA. Okay. So now we're talking about, if we find somebody that's close to it, but they're not going to be able to really own this for 6 months. And the company says, well, we don't have the resources to put into developing and training this talent. So let's just keep looking. Well, the joke is it's going to take us 6 months to now go out and find that person when the talent
Yeah.
pool is that small, right? And so if there was more integration and work that we can do on the talent development side of things, it opens the pool up, and it helps us kind of work step in step and meet the market where it is.
Yeah, Brian, you're nodding your head a lot in that. It sounds like you've seen this firsthand quite a bit.
Yeah, I think the number of times that we've interacted with folks that like, oh, we really, really, really need this thing, and it's like, okay, well, here's 9 out of 10, or the market's like, this isn't available of fully what you want, and the time and the trigger is not pulled, and it's they then get backed into this corner and then come back 6, 12 months later and say, "Okay, let's do it." And you're like, "We could have just done this," right? Like, time is so vital and these people are so capable of learning. Like, let's put them in that opportunity to learn and succeed and give them the tools and resources to be successful in that. And yeah, it comes up time and time again.
Where do you think that comes from? Because I could imagine a couple different things, but I often, in just my non-recruiting view of watching things, it seems like very often companies and leaders ultimately don't know what they're looking for or don't know what success is, so they're kind of like looking for certain badges that, well, they worked at Apple, so they must be good at this, or they have this degree, they went to this school, so they must be good at this, rather than really being able to assess it themselves. And if they can't assess it themselves, and they certainly can't develop it themselves because they don't really know what makes someone good. Does that resonate at all, or are there other factors at play in that hesitancy?
I'd say that I think that definitely can be the case. I think that for a lot of the people that we work really closely with, they do have a pretty finely tuned meter of what they're
Okay,
looking for.
great. Okay,
Sometimes what that covers, right, is like they need somebody that can do so much at a startup that it
sure.
really makes the number of people who are capable of doing all of that really low, coupled with already having smaller talent pools. To answer your first question, and I don't know how to say this in a way that won't get me in trouble, so I'm just going to say it, is
Let's do it.
I think that in large part, um, talent development is looked at as a cost, right? That's
Yeah.
expensive. And this is the part that might get me in trouble is I think that in both of these arenas, both in talent acquisition and in talent development, there are people who are so excellent at this work, and there are a lot of people who are very not excellent at this work. And when
We
they've
talked about this. Yeah, there's no bar for there's very little barrier or bar that's set for what good is that people can benchmark against.
Right. And so when leaders have sat through like bad acting videos that they're just trying to like fast forward to be able to check the box
Yeah.
of like, yes, I did the training and like, I'm trying to like, can I download something that can like click for me to get through this, right? They go, I don't want to pay for that. As opposed to people who have had it done really well and they've been cool. I'm able to like learn and develop and like gain new skills. I think that we can start to open up and get people excited about using that to fast track their team to higher level of productivity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Brian, what has been your experience? Coming from that engineering background, where I don't know, there's certainly there's many more kind of bars or degrees or like things that clearly denote that when you moved from kind of that world in now that you're more in the talent acquisition world. I don't know how have you seen that transition?
Let's see if I answer this directly or not, but we can circle back if I don't. But I think in engineering it is a little bit easier to have this bar, right? There's a lot of binary. This was right, this was wrong. You know how to do this, you don't know how to do that. You can put someone through a test and see how they succeed, and that's really challenging to do in these talent areas, like you were already discussing. Um, what I think can be where I think it changes a lot is there sometimes you have this super duper niche role. We hired an electromagnetic um, analyst before, right? Someone who can do extremely complicated multi-physics simulations in the electromagnetic space and then how it impacts the mechanical world. Like this is like highly,
Nobody
highly
knows what you're
niche.
talking about anymore. Like it's
Right.
it's so far beyond that the words we don't even
Right.
understand.
But that was the point, right? Like, the point was
Yeah, yeah,
that good luck, just like, if you're gonna hire someone and train them to do that, like, you're gonna need to set aside years to do it. So, like,
that's a
that
really good point.
that role is like, yeah, we gotta get the right, like, person who's at least maybe not 10 out of 10, but, like, maybe they're 8 or 9 out of 10 on the technical skills, and they're 10 out of 10 with, like, the mentality side of things. Um, but there's a lot of roles that are much more generalist, and I think it's in those areas that they say, "Oh, I want everything." But in reality, like, let's check a few boxes, prove that they're super competent and can do a lot of things, and then they're gonna figure out the rest, and again, give them the tools and the resources because, kinda going back to part of what we were talking about before too is, yeah, sometimes they really know what they want, but also what they really want can change. Like, the business needs
Mm,
change, the needs of the team change. So it's more about hiring for attitude and aptitude, whenever you can, whenever these
mhm.
roles that you, are less specific, so that way you can use talent development to get folks to where they need to be to ultimately support the business needs the best.
Yeah. I mean, since you all, like you said, you're hiring for these very, very often, very specific roles. Like we're not going to, you're not going to develop, almost no matter how big the company is, you're not going to develop a talent development strategy for teaching people how to be electromagnetic analysts. It's just not going to happen. But kind of to that point, and to the point that you made, Sega, of people seeing L&D as a cost center. From your perspective, I think there's a great opportunity to give especially people in talent development some clues as to what are a few things that are maybe the non-technical things that are the most common deficiencies or misses or something in candidates, that if a company at least had these, it would dramatically or maybe at least somewhat increase their talent pool, so that it would make that hiring process easier, because we know we can cover these, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Like, are there any things that come to mind where that are frequently, maybe they just aren't quite ready for this yet, that if we could get them ready, it would really help the hiring process?
Yeah, first thing that comes to mind on the for non-technical areas that I think there could be a lot of support are kind of on the cultural side of things, or kind of the pace, autonomy, and ownership required to be successful in a lot of these roles, right? That we're going through a topic Brian's been talking about a lot recently is like a 1-3-1, right? Here, help me as if I do this incorrectly, but like concise outline of the problem, 3 potential paths forward, and my suggested path forward. And being able to use that sort of
Mm,
structure, bring like proactive solutions, figure out how to take ownership, right? We're not, these sort of environments aren't places where people can kind of like wait for a numbered list of priorities to be given to them by their supervisor or an outline of what they're going to be doing. Sometimes you'll have that, but often it's just, right, go forward, figure it out,
yeah,
align well, and pieces like that, right? So that's non-technical. That does absolutely go the breadth of the organization, and it's
yep,
something that makes it so that can't we can't pull in people from legacy companies, right? They don't
yep.
have, it's just a very different kind of pace and design to that.
Yep. That makes that junior level where, and yeah, they just anybody who doesn't have that ownership experience under their belt, it can be shocking the first time you get it, and take and then so that makes a lot of sense. That saying, okay, we have a pathway to take this person and make them get them to understand that there's bits of critical thinking in that, decision making, communication skills. There's like little bits and pieces in there that makes a lot of sense.
Another thing that pops up is just the design for mentorship, right? So like
Mm,
how can we make the process and path to mentor so that when we do have somebody who can transfer their highly technical insights to a junior individual, yeah, we're not trying to create a learning module to teach us technical insights, but we can design the structure to help the mentor transfer that information with incurring the fewest number of like hour to hours spent, right? So we can also have them working on their technical components as well.
that makes a lot of sense. So from the talent development perspective, it's kind of like maybe there's a bit of teaching people how to be a mentor in that, but then also maybe just like kind of providing the structure of what does a mentorship program look like. Maybe there's some software involved. Maybe just like how often do you touch base? Maybe how should conversations go? That makes a lot of sense, because then, yeah, again, and I think this is one of the challenges that L&D falls into a lot is when people come to us with a problem, like we want to be the ones finding the solution. Like we want to be the solution rather than like providing the framework for the solution so that you can kind of like solve it yourself. I think we miss that a decent amount, probably because like in times where like leadership development for example, often when you stand up a leadership development program, the L&D team is meant to be like the experts in leadership, like that. So they're the facilitators. They're the ones that's doing it all. And if that's your mentality for all these technical domains, you're just going to be like, forget about it. When you can there's still something that we can bring to the table of here's some things, here's some tools that we can provide you to make you better able at supporting yourself. That makes a lot of sense. Brian, anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think a big area that some companies could do a lot better to support their needs in this area is being crystal clear on what their company culture is and crystal clear on what they value in their teammates. Like, you can do this by even if you're, been around for a couple few years, or even if you just have a founding team, like, look at what's been successful in those teammates or at the company so far. What are the key characteristics? What are the key traits that got you there and is consistent across the organization? And, like, really highlight that in, like, culture statements, and then also and in your hiring and in your talent development processes. Like, don't try to be everything at once. No organization can be everything at once, but know who you are, know your identity, and keep aligning that throughout hiring and talent development. Like, one of my favorite, like, Elon quotes or references ever is kind of the idea that a company is the sum of its vectors, right? It's not just what how big of a vector you are, how much you get done. It's like, what direction are you also pointing? And so making sure
Yeah.
that everyone's pointing in the same direction and you know how you're operating is huge.
Yeah, I can, as you were talking through that and this idea of like making sure you bring in the culture, it sparked in me because when I think a lot about having culture and having some kind of like onboarding process to get people in on the culture, it reminds me of turnover, and especially early turnover and the challenges of turnover. For you, when you all are, I guess, how much do you have to fight against that in organizations? I mean, you're dealing with relatively, highly mission driven, relatively small organizations, so maybe it's not as much as an issue for the folks that you're working with. But I don't know whether it's companies you work with or more broadly, how hard of a factor is that to overcome just that like early hire attrition? Because I keep hearing about how it's kind of rising throughout the world.
Yeah, it's definitely a key factor, and it's something that we work on a lot. So, kind of to look at this from the angle that we see it a lot is a lot of like staffing agencies, which is kind of like we don't identify as a staffing agency, right? We do executive and highly
Oh,
technical
interesting.
headhunting. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It's like,
that makes sense. That you're
yeah,
not just like, it's not just bringing a bunch of people. Got it.
right. We're not bringing a bunch of people. It's not butts in seats. It's like a strategic, who are we looking for?
Yeah,
How do we find them? Like, we're not going to like, hey, please apply, right? Like the people aren't applying for the jobs, but
yeah,
almost exclusively aren't applying to the jobs. Um,
yeah.
So, what we'll see is a lot of organizations that do kind of like similar things to us. They almost have like sales people as
Yes,
recruiters, right? They're trying to like
yes,
sell the job. And there's
yes.
definitely a component about of what we do, which is like getting people excited about the role, but we also do a lot of like door in the face work where we go like, this is not going to be a good fit for you
Mm,
if you are XYZ. And that doesn't mean that you're bad, but your style, right? If your style can't fit with the style of the company, like this is not going to be a good fit, and we want to screen you out early, right? We're going to waste everybody's time if we get you into the seat and this was a mismatch. So like there's some like easy examples to point to. We've talked about pace, right? That's an easy one. Another one, especially if people coming from legacy companies, engineers, as you both know better than I do, even love to get things right. Right? They like for things to be done the right
mm,
way. They know the numbers. You want the numbers to add up. Like they've got a concept of like black and white, what's right, what's wrong. And with startups, when looking at potentially pulling people from legacy orgs, uh, it can be like, yeah, I'm gonna get it right. I gotta get it right. Insert funny joke about Boeing. Okay, we gotta go slow because we gotta get it right. Um,
yeah,
but uh, okay, but at startups, it's like, yes, we want to get it right. Sometimes we want to get to our first iteration, and it's okay if it breaks because we're going to learn a lot from it breaking. And when you're pulling somebody from a Raytheon, right, like getting that concept can be really difficult. They could say, "Yeah, I like to work at a really fast pace," but then when you get into it and you go, "Would you be okay building something that's gonna break?" Because you got to build it fast, and it's like, whoa, no, that like goes against my identity, right? And so I say all that to say that yeah, figuring out how to get a clear vision of what does work really well, who does work really well at this organization, and one, making sure that's what you want it to look like, right? So
yeah.
getting a clear snapshot, what works really well, and then going, senior leadership, is this an accurate representation? Otherwise we need to change some things. And then being able to take that and communicate it to talent, because it's so expensive in time and money and resources to be getting people into the seat that aren't going to fit.
It's interesting because I think, again, reflecting back on a lot of my experiences, what I'm hearing from you is just the importance of, not only from you, Brian, like the importance of having that really clear culture, but then which can often come from a talent development organization. But we spend all of our time focusing on the employees, and we kind of start at day one, and how do we get people going there? but it would be incredibly helpful for us to, because I think quite frankly, we just say, okay, now recruiting, you go figure it out. And recruiting goes and does their own thing, and they like look at the culture, and then, but having both teams talking together through that entire creation process. Because you're right. I mean, I remember, I forget his name. There's some computer engineer. He's written a few books on dating, and he was talking about how in the dating world, what you really want to do is lean in as much as possible to your weirdest qualities. Like if you're a nerd, own the fact that you're a nerd. If you're into Star Trek, like all of your pictures should be in Star Trek, because though that is going to dramatically decrease the pool of people who are out there who find you interesting, the people in that pool are like, this is my thing, right? And so then it's great. And to your point, I've definitely been at companies where their recruiting team was much more of a sales org, and it was much more of a mentality of, no, we want to be, if we're in the office, we don't want to say we're in the office in the beginning. We want to wait and kind of like get them talking to us first, and then once they're in love with us, we'll be like, oh, by the way, we're in the office, but now they're going to love us, so it'll be okay. And it's like, nah, I don't know if that's a good strategy.
Right. Exactly. I think first of all, that was my strategy with dating, and it worked really well with Brian. So he's also he's my co-founder and husband.
You found the nerd.
Yeah.
So,
but yes, exactly. Like being able to be to be able to see and then be able to communicate your true culture. Another good example of this, we did on our podcast. We had Hans Koenigsmann, and
yeah.
Hans, right? And we were talking about kind of the culture at SpaceX, and talking about like how many working tons of hours, and it was a really fun conversation. And a friend of mine texted me and was like, "Hey, it was a really great podcast, but I just thought, like, it's like really bad that SpaceX has that culture, that like people have to like work so long, and they would see their boss like coming in before them and leaving after them. It sets like a really intense example." And I was like, bad. Like it's not, maybe it's not good for you. And that's great that you know that, right? But how sad would it be if there wasn't a place like this, and the people who wanted to work like that, now they don't have a home, right? That's now we're removing all the diversity of these companies to make it so that they fit everyone, and then it makes it so that nobody has a home that really fits them. And there are people who thrive in that SpaceX culture.
Yeah.
And yeah, there are people who get burnt out super fast. And that that's okay. Like that's good. And we would want how terrible would it be then if somebody's interviewing at SpaceX and we're going, oh, work like 40 hours a week, right? Work like that, right? Like we wouldn't want to represent it that way. We want to say, you're going to work with some of the smartest, most intense people in the world. You're going to put your literal blood, sweat, and tears into this organization, and you're going to achieve things that nobody on the planet has ever achieved before. You're going to scare the bejesus out of a bunch of people, and you're going to light the fire inside of others, and like that's the goal.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I know, speaking for myself, I honestly, when I first started working at SpaceX, it was really hard for me. Like I felt it was almost unfair, because I started working there right after my daughter was born. So she was 3 months old when I started, and I was really frustrated for a really long time, because it was like, this company is everything I want it to be. Like, I'm deeply passionate about space. I want to be pushing it, but like, the only way to like really like stand out and move forward is just by putting in these crazy hours, and I'm not in a position where I want to put in those crazy hours. And I was like really frustrated by that. And then I'll say myself, I grew up and kind of realized that not everyone needs to be able to work everywhere. That's, and it's great that we have different people will thrive in different environments, exactly like you said. And that's fine. And that's great,
Yeah. This is all so very well said already, but like another way to quick paraphrase this is like, be brutally honest about who you are to yourself, and then be brutally honest about who you are to others, and you don't need to apologize for that. And that's what will,
Yeah.
like, circling back to the beginning, like that's where attrition comes from, is if someone starts and it's not what they expect, or you're changing the job on them, or this, that, and the other, like that's why people leave. People don't leave because it's what they thought it was going to be. Like that's pretty rare, right? Like it's because it's not what they thought it would be.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. To kind of end this note or put a cherry on the top, maybe there's not a way to do what I'm going to try to do right now. So feel free to tell me if I'm putting you in an unfair spot. But kind of one of the things that we try to do here, one of the arcs, especially for talent development people, is to try to figure out, okay, like from the talent acquisition perspective, how can we help prove the worth of talent development? Like, what are the things that talent development can do that'll be most valuable to talent acquisition and help improve it? And so, if a talent development team is focusing on these things of, having the important, really defining culture really well, making sure it's woven into the process, making sure we're teaching these like critical, we have a pathway for teaching critical thinking and decision making and communication. I don't know if I can ask you for a number because that seems a little absurd, but I don't know. Just what's your sense of how much that would be worth to an organization to have those boxes checked? How much better or simpler or faster could it potentially make their talent acquisition process?
I mean, I think an easy number for companies to calculate, you know, is to look at what is early attrition. What does early attrition look
Sure.
like, right? And like
Yeah.
that's a way to calculate numbers. If you go, hey, if we have a team that's able to create a really strong program for bringing people into our organization, like, if we're able to reduce early attrition,
Yes.
then
Yes.
now we just have dollar amounts we can put to it, right? So it's like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a formula that we can look at. I think another way to look at numbers, like, so, and this is something an idea I was hanging on from earlier in our conversation. I'll loop back to it, and bring them back together. But another way that I think talent development can really support organizations, and again, especially speaking about where our mind frame is in this niche of space startups, clean tech startups, is we're often looking for these, we call it like the heads of, this role that comes in
Hmm.
early in a startup. They need to be able to do the thing, right? They have to be technical enough to
Mm-hmm.
do the thing with their
Mm-hmm.
own brain, their own hands, their own computer. And then they also have to be strategic enough to make a plan for the future. And they need to have the leadership skills in order to grow a team under them. That's a lot of areas of expertise, right? And you're not owning one tiny piece. You're owning like a whole department. You're like doing a whole
Mm-hmm.
department,
Yeah.
right? Technically, strategically, and growing a team. And this golden person we're looking for frequently. And it's tough because you usually have to snag them from another startup, because otherwise it's just too many things. People don't have at bats for that many things regularly in order to develop, being a seasoned expert in all of those different things. So creating talent development outlines that supports in the leadership and, the
Mm.
leadership component of that, so that you can take somebody
Yeah.
who's technically excellent and build them into a leader, because you've got some time, right? It's not a long time, but you've got some time
Yeah.
to develop them into a leader before they need to be growing those people. It really opens up the talent pool to who we're able to bring on. If we go, cool, we need somebody who is technically excellent, who can see the big picture, but we're confident that we're going to be able to grow them into a leader, like that. That's a big lever. That would be a big, a lever for us to pull.
To add to that, like we've found that so many of these startups, right, they're taking big swings. 90% of
Yeah.
startups fail. Like you got to take big swings, you got to take risks. And part of that is a little bit in hiring and talent development, right? You can hire, we sometimes call it like the sequel, right? You can hire someone who's already done it before, and they're going to come back and they're going to do it again. And it's going to be the sequel, right? But how often is a sequel anywhere close to as good as the
Interesting.
first hit, right? And so what we're really looking for is like who's primed to make that like box office hit, like once they're hired. And you don't know, you have to take some risks, but if you can, on the talent acquisition side, know how to identify that potential and pair that with talent development who can increase the probability of that person following through to deliver something really special, that's worth like that's the make or break of a company, right? Like the vast
Yeah,
majority of these companies, they have ideas that can work. It's about executing them fast enough and cheap enough. And that so much of that comes down to having the right talent who's like ready and developed properly. And so I also think you could put a dollar sign on that, right? If you could
for
say,
sure.
I can take someone who hasn't done this before and I can ensure some level of increased probability of success, like um, based on having done it before. Like now you're delivering tons of value.
You're both making me feel really good. So at the end of last year, I spent some time sitting down thinking through and creating this framework that I call the talent launch system. It's meant to be like a 4-step approach of how to create a talent development system that like really focuses on impacting the business. And I call it the talent launch system because it's got this big play off of a rocket analogy. So it's like the first one is stage 0, then the first stage and second stage and everything. And so the first 3 stages are, first is streamlined compliance training, because it's actually a really simple box that you can check really quickly. But a lot of companies, they just spend way too much time and energy, mainly time, trying to do really bad compliance training. Then number 2 is hiring and interviewing training, so that you're making sure the people you're bringing in are really good. And then number 3 is manager training. So it sounds like, those kinds of things are, at least a few of them are roughly aligned with a lot of what you all are talking about. So that's awesome. Amazingly, over a half hour has already gone by. Something that I didn't think to ask you before, but I would love to quick question to kind of throw out at you, since you get to work with such interesting teams doing amazing things. What is the most interesting role that you've ever hired for, if one pops into your head?
Really interesting. We have so many interesting roles. I'm like, so many
For
things are
sure.
coming to mind for so many different reasons. We partner with Varda Space, and we were hiring their head of mechanisms. And we needed somebody that
Okay.
was able to create mechanisms in like that work in 0G. And
Okay.
so getting to speak to people who have that technical expertise, and the company was very early at that time, which is a really fun time to get to talk to, because the people who get it, and the people who don't, right? And we can talk to them about it till we're blue in the face, and we do. And sometimes you can get people excited about it that don't understand it when you're first starting the conversation. But that was a really that was a really cool technical role that is also working on in-space manufacturing, and so it's just everything about it was really exciting.
Excellent. Brian, have you found yours?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there's too many. I guess I'll touch on a couple which both coincidentally happen to be in the Bay Area, but one of them was a kind of like payload RF, like radio frequency person who's just so specific and there's such tricky people to find and hire for. And we got the job and we were hearing about it and we were just like, oh, that's this person. We interviewed this person before. And being able to like call that person up who's making way more money at a bigger company and convince them like, no, this is the job that you've always wanted. Like you should move again. You just started this job, you're making way more, but you should move again because this is the job for you. And like making that happen was super cool. And another like employee number 1 head of propulsion role a year ago was a blast. Kind of a similar thing of being like, oh, this we're gonna find a place for this and this is an exceptionally fun problem to solve and being able to make that match and kind of these department heads, if you will, that are highly technical but can do so much more than that. Like that's where so much of the fun has been for us.
And if I can add on to what Brian's saying, there is part of what's so like we love people. we love people, we love space, we love clean tech. Like, that's why we do this. And so
Yeah.
part of what is so energizing and so magical about the work that we're doing is we're developing this database of all the relevant people in our
Yes.
industry, and not just
Yes.
what they can do technically, not just what's on their resume, but like what lights a fire inside them? What are they motivated by? What is going to be their game changing next role? And
Yeah.
like, so for that, RF engineer, Brian was mentioning, it was really cool to be able to give him a call, right? Call him up, and we were like, "Hey, we found it." And he was like, "No, I like things are good. I'm at this big tech company. Like, it's good." And I was like,
No, really.
"We found it. Let me send it to you." And he's like, "Okay, I'll take a look." Calls me that day, and he was like, "I think you're right. Like, let's talk. Like, let's get it in." And it was like the fastest interview process, and he's so happy there, right? And so being
That's
able
so cool.
to, like, we're not collecting resumes, we're like collecting dreams. It's a very
Ooh,
cheesy way of putting it, but like,
that's the tagline. That is a
yeah, right?
tagline, right? Ad Astra. We don't collect resumes. We collect dreams.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and it was the same with the other example, right? You talk to these people, you go, well, what is the thing that would, light a fire inside of you? And then you maybe it's a year later, but when we find it, we can call them up and go, we found it. Let's go.
that's neat, and that's the thing I love about the startup. There's so many things I love about kind of like the startup, especially like the space startup space, is that one, being in startup world means you're accepting massive swings, so it's hard, it can be depressing, you can have like mental breakdowns, but man, the highs are so high. Like they're just the wins couldn't be bigger. But I'm always amazed because like since leaving SpaceX, I stayed in the LA area, and now I know people at all the cool companies. Like I know a bunch of people at Relativity. I know a bunch of people at Rocket Lab. I know, that like it's amazing how small and tight knit a community it really is. So I'm sure for you, yeah, getting to know those people, you can just have this community, this pool to pull from. That I mean, I'll be honest. I'll say I envy you of like the niche that you have found and what you're going for. Like I just can't imagine like the amazing conversations you must get to have about this, especially in the world. The other thing I like about the fact that I was working at SpaceX and that stuff is there's so many things going. It's so easy to turn on the news, get really down on the world, but like in our sphere, like there's just every reason to be amazingly hopeful about the future. Like we can solve all the problems, we can do it all, we can feed everybody, we can go to other planets, we can do it all. Like it's neat.
That is so well put. It's a really excellent point.
So to close it out here, I do want to finish with a couple quick questions. One, what is one book that you would recommend everyone read and why? Or a podcast suggestion, one or the other.
Oh my gosh. I'm laughing because I won't shut up about Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's my
Perfect.
favorite. It's my favorite book. It's right behind me. I am obsessed with Atomic Habits. It's all about building an intentional life, and doing so through not just like muscling and willpower, but using your neurobiology to create systems that your system responds well to, so you can create habits for yourself.
I love it. Brian, do you have one?
Comic habits too. Like I don't consume nearly as much as Seika does. Like she consumes so much good stuff on this stuff, and that's been one of my favorites. Usually I'm not like that into kind of like the personal development type stuff. Like um and that one just really clicked with me and felt very practical and helped me understand my brain and how to make things better, and how you can do things that makes your life worse without you really realizing it. And so yeah, I guess we're kind of um accidental atomic habit geeks over in our household over here.
I love it. I need to just finally do it. Just despite my bookshelf behind me, I have not read Atomic Habits yet. And I think it's just because I hear so many people talking about it. I'm like, oh, okay, like it's like the thing. But everybody keeps telling me it's like a great book. So I should actually read it. What is one skill that has, I focus a lot whenever I talk about training, I talk about behaviors, I talk about skills. What skill has most helped you succeed in your life?
I think the thing that comes up for me is dedication over motivation. So, right, we
Interesting.
can love motivation to get us started and have that big bang of dopamine when we like come up with a new plan. And I think for me, I've created kind of like a piece of my identity is keeping my eyes set on the goal, regardless of motivation fluctuating, right, or the energy for that thing fluctuating. Keep going when the time gets tough.
Excellent. And come up for you, Brian. See you thinking.
Brian has so many skills that make him excellent at what he does. Some that stand out to me are he sees details much more like he thoughtfully, and he just sees them better more quickly than a lot of people. And I think that has made him really excellent at a lot of what he does. He sees details, he sees when things are off, and he's able to point to them and articulate what they are. Um, he's also really thoughtful in relationships. So like he takes a lot of care and love with the relationships that he's handling, and it's really a useful skill in business. And I think that can be overlooked a lot. But it, if you want people to have a dopamine release when they interact with you, you want to make the world better throughout each of your interactions, right? It's a key piece of being successful at what we do.
Absolutely. That's why everybody needs a good partner to pick them up and remind them of like, hey, you're doing good.
Yeah, thank you. That was very, very kind. I just got to sit back and hear words of praise, so thank you.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. I think, like I said, I was really looking forward to this conversation because I don't think the talent development and talent acquisition worlds mix enough, and so hopefully this provided a little bit of push to some of the talent development folks out there of like, hey, you can help the talent acquisition folks. There's real ways that you can improve it. Start talking to them, get to know them a little bit better. So thank you so much for being on today. I wish you all the luck with Ad Astra. Like I said, I'm jealous of the conversation. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my job, but you got some pretty good stuff going on there. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us. Really impressive stuff that you're doing, and it's a true pleasure getting to connect with you. Every time we speak, I'm like, feel like I just drank a coffee. I'm ready to go take over the world.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt. This was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you liked the discussion, make sure to hit like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. As a reminder, if your team is struggling keeping up with the training development demands of your organization, we want to help. Better Everyday Studios is a full-service instructional design team that can help you with everything from ideation to actual content creation and delivery. Please reach out to us using the link in the episode notes below. Have a great day.